coming out on this rainy morning for our Impact of Technology on Filmmaking, Finance, and Distribution panel. I'm Stephen Adams. You can't hear me? Could you raise the volume there a bit? Is that better? All right. Good morning. I'm Stephen Adams, a partner at Buffalo 8 Productions, and I'm very happy to invite you guys here this morning for our conversation about the impact of technology on filmmaking, finance, and distribution, and many other things, because tech is impacting every aspect of the business. But I'd like to start by introducing my panelists here. On my left is Rebecca Hawks from Schedule 2 Limited in London.
Hello.
Good morning.
Morning.
Gerren Crochet from the Gersh agency.
Good morning.
And my esteemed colleague and friend, Matthew Helderman of Bondit Media Capital.
Good morning.
So let's jump in. Why don't you start by telling us, what you do in your business, what your business is?
My company is Schedule 2. We're a London-based technical services and post-production company. We work mainly in the independent feature film sector with films of varying budgets, and we've seen a very big shift in technology in the last 10 to 15 years.
I bet you have. Yeah. And Mr. Crochet?
So my name is Gerren. I work for the Gersh agency. When I'm not competing for sexiest, smokiest can voice, I'm doing film sales and packaging, mostly on the independent film side.
When I'm also not competing for that voice, I run two companies. Buffalo 8's a production, post-production, and a management company. We've been fortunate enough to work with some of the technology players I'm sure we'll talk about this morning, and also run a company called Bondit Media Capital, which is a media-focused, senior secured financier, and I'm sure we can dive into that. And we've certainly seen technology shift both the way those deals are originated, structured, and also who's ultimately looking for that kind of capital.
And I think it's safe to say that we're in a business that's always been disrupted by technology. If you talk about the move from a Nickelodeon to a full-length silent feature, from silent feature to sound, from sound into color, from color then competing with television, then cable. I mean, it's always gone on and on and on. I think it's just happening faster. So, I mean, what have you seen? You mentioned that you've seen a lot of changes in filmmaking and film delivery over the last 15 years.
I think the initial shift with 35 mil, now we no longer need the massive photochemical factory to produce these, the product, the end user product. I think that has been huge. But I think we need to take care because it doesn't necessarily mean it's made it cheaper. This is what technology hasn't done. So we've gone from video, we've had tape, which was, I would say, more inferior. But now we're coming on to the streaming platforms. This is where it's really changed because you're getting big quality files to view your film, for the 35 mil.
And so when you talk about, you mentioned the fact that it's easier to make films. I mean, what are you seeing in terms of that? I mean, everybody can make a film nowadays if they want to, have the will to. How's that changing your business?
So the democratization of film is a little bit of a misnomer, I think. I remember when I was a graduate student trying to hope to learn how to produce, and we had luminaries coming to UCLA teaching us about here's how I produced, everything from The Godfather to, recent television shows, and every single one of these speakers from a prior generation would say, anybody can make a movie. You all have movie cameras in your pockets now. Everybody's got an iPhone. You can just go out and make a movie. I think there's one film that I know of that's been shot on an iPhone that's actually been distributed. So as I tend to look at this situation as when you make a widget, you have a bill of materials for that widget, meaning it used to take celluloid and chemicals and everything like that. We're removing via technology and new means a lot of those items on the bill of materials. What hasn't really changed is how we do those transactions, how many steps there are to those transactions and that process, and those aspects have not gotten cheaper. So as technology continues to grow in households and in handsets and consumer devices and everything like that, I think that the real innovation is going to come not only from the kind of reducing continuously the bill of materials and going straight from intellectual property to consumer, but also in terms of who's transacting that, how that material gets to those eyeballs.
So Matthew, what are you seeing in terms of the impact on your business? Technology is impacting finance as well.
Yeah, I think I'd make a comment first on Gerren's statement about the misnomer. I agree, although I would say Buffalo 8 and Bondit own a company called ABS Payroll, an entertainment payroll company that's been around for 30 years, and primarily focusing on running payroll and providing accounting services for low-budget content, so sub-$5 million budgets. We will process payroll for 250 films this year alone, and that number continues to grow. And I think while a lot of the sort of traditional films that we're launching in markets past, the $10 million, $20 million, $30 million pre-sale driven international film, that's declined. There's less of those films, and there's a ton of these smaller movies being made, whether that's a $100,000 iPhone film that is going to be a great paperweight for someone, or it's a $1 million movie that breaks out at Sundance and sort of keeps that dream alive. I think the technology side we've seen is impacted everything from who's buying content to how cheap it can be made. I think the expectation producers have, and I'm sure you see it in your business as well, is they expect everything to be cheaper because we now live in this culture where we want everything and we want it yesterday. And so we see producers wanting things cheaper, faster, but I agree with Gerren. The expectation also doesn't necessarily mesh with the fact that these transactions haven't changed. Getting an actor, getting your schedule locked, working with an agency to structure the finance plan, all of that has remained pretty much done by email and phones. Nothing has really changed. I think the buyers have changed, and I think with people like Apple sort of figuring out what that content strategy is, they're obviously a force to be reckoned with, and I think the 10,000-pound gorilla for everyone is Netflix. It's changed everything. A lot of the films that historically may have had some pre-sales here, a lot of those buyers are saying we want to wait to see if Netflix wants to do a worldwide deal. And so I think the Netflix effect is huge, and then also the expectation of the producers has shifted a bit.
And so speaking of Netflix, I mean, Netflix is the 10,000-pound gorilla, and it's sort of missing, but still here this year. Any thoughts on that aspect in terms of?
Well, we actually do deliver to Netflix, and the thought that it's cheaper because you've done a worldwide deal with Netflix is completely wrong. They want all the same materials, and they will still have the cinema files, so it is a complete full delivery, which is going to cost you a lot of money. And of course, they're changing their delivery specs continuously because they are a technology company, not a film company. So they want the best possible files all the time. So yeah, if they have the film, it's not going to be cheaper.
So when you think, do you see filmmakers being able to reckon with this aspect very easily? Has it been a struggle?
It is a struggle because most films in the independent sector are not shot in 4K. 4K, though, as I suppose consumers, we assume everything's 4K. Well, it isn't. And it's a really expensive workflow. So that is the bar at Netflix.
So are you seeing perhaps maybe even there's a bit of a gap in terms of information with filmmakers? When filmmakers start off, they're not as well informed as they should be in terms of being able to deliver a project.
I think there's always been a gap in information. It's the reality of when you're making the film and you want people to see the film, yes, and you don't want to pay the piece in between.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I mean, how do we help filmmakers to bridge this gap of information, this missing information?
It's, I give our filmmakers, and I'm sure you guys will be familiar with, on the sales agency agreement, the delivery schedule of materials. It's
that thing I always get and never read. Yes,
that's the one. Yeah, or people think it's multiple choice. There's 60
right.
items on there. Let's choose 4.
No, I've seen that.
And it's true though. To this day, I've been delivering films for over 30 years, and it's like the elephant in the room. Well, it's not that sort of film.
Right.
Well, it is. It's a film that wants to be seen. And yeah, I think you just need to say to people, this is it. Give them the truth up front. This is how much it costs to make your deliverables.
Get it done.
Yeah.
I think we're kind of identifying another place where technology can help, which is, hey, I've made this incredible IP, and I've been lucky enough to find a very big gorilla who's 10,000 pounds now to buy this, right? there's a gap right there in terms of how do I do that? How do I make this easy so that I can actually make these deliveries? And right now it's a little bit antiquated. It's true.
It is an older system, but I think we shouldn't lose sight of the fact the film is somebody's baby, their child.
Yes.
You need to create something that gives it longevity and gives it a full life. So it's in the actual filmmaker's interest. And just to put it onto some hard drives is just not going to cut it.
And Gerren, in terms of content, are you seeing a shift in content because of the rise of technology in filmmaking?
I think I have 47 or 48 films on our slate right now. They're in some phase of packaging, whether they're about to shoot or whether they're fantastic script with an element attached. Every single one of those projects, we're having a conversation, almost no matter whether they're a finished film or at the very beginnings, post-script stage. Well, what about Netflix? Because that jumps several steps in some cases of the entire process that we're talking about. So in a way that's enabled by technology, but for my job of all of the different verticals of deals that are possible, of how you put when you come to a marketplace like this, how you put one of these films together, I'm effectively thinking, can I skip 5 of these steps, maybe 4 of these steps, or do I have to do all of these steps now?
And what are you seeing in terms of distribution, Matthew? People are distributing films very differently than they used to even 3 years ago, and both in terms of what their options are and also how they use technology.
Yeah, going back to your comment about the sort of lack of Netflix here in Cannes this year, and sort of what does that imply? And we've been having a lot of these conversations with a lot of people. I think there's a great saying that a lawyer once said to me about this business, which is, there's a saying in free mountain rock climbing, which is you have to respect the mountain. And rock climbers that don't, they sort of believe their own grandiosity, end up dying and sort of perilously. And Hollywood is very much the same way. Folks that don't respect the mountain, no matter how much money they come in with, they go out with a flash and a bang. And the business has seen it 50 times over. Netflix is different. If you think that Reed Hastings and that board are not weighing the decision incredibly like a chess match to not come to Cannes, I think you'd be mistaken. I think they respect the mountain, but they also know they're a tech company. I think Hastings made a comment at the most recent quarterly report, which was, we've got 2,000 employees that work up in Silicon Valley that believe they work for the best technology company, and we've got 1,000 employees in LA that think they work for the best entertainment company, and they're both right. And they are changing the way producers, creatives, even like us, financiers, think about where the business is going. And if they're spending $8 billion on content in 1 year, that's crazy. It's totally nuts. It's more than multiple studios combined. And this is a 20-year startup. Right? It's a brand new company, effectively. So we are definitely seeing, like Gerren mentions, so many filmmakers coming through the door and wanting to just go skip the whole queue, go right to Netflix, forget the rest. But I also think, I'm sure you see it every day, the heyday of Netflix pre-buying feature films versus now them saying, we need to see it break out at a festival, or we need to see it screen with an audience, or you need an equity piece, and they'll maybe leave one territory open. That has changed like crazy.
Yeah, you go from a strategy of we have more money than anybody else to go and buy content wherever we want to we have more money than anybody else to go and make content. So it's not as though Netflix is not a buyer, as we know, but a lot of that cash is going to their own content. And stay tuned for even more. Yeah, they're building an animation studio, like, et cetera, et cetera. So I think one of the reasons why this market feels a little more bustling than AFM or Berlin even is because when that gorilla steps out of the room and everybody else kind of pauses for a market, maybe two markets, things kind of come back to normal. In a transactional sense, that is. But the question remains, how are these different entities around these marketplaces that are putting and structuring and doing all these content deals going to continue to move forward and innovate in their own platforms alongside this other mountain that's being created?
You know, it's... Oh, sorry, go ahead. Please.
No, I was saying it's Absolutely, and at the end, when it gets to the the post side and delivery, it is just like delivering to the traditional studio. They have adopted exactly the same method, exactly the same way of taking things in. So it's no different.
I was speaking to an agent. I don't know, it was a year ago, and we had been talking about what Netflix had wanted a month prior or 2 months prior, and we had a deal that came across the desk, and it was perfect for Netflix based on that conversation. We went out to lunch with the same agent. We were so excited to have this discussion, and they said, "Oh, Netflix doesn't want that." And I said, "I have my notes from like 30 days ago. You said they wanted this."
Nope.
And he said, "Netflix isn't like a studio that pivots. They're a tech company that iterates. It's version 2, 2.1, 2.2. They move way faster than Hollywood. Hollywood makes these belabored decisions that take forever. Netflix makes a decision like a tech company. They iterate their platform, and Hollywood's trying to figure out what the heck to do with it."
Yeah. Okay, please.
I saw people have never consumed more content, and I saw a little study that said around 2015 there were about 9 hours of content consumed. I think this is in the United States, on average, by the average adult. In 2017, that was up almost 20%.
That's amazing.
Almost like an hour and a half. Television consumption was down about 5%. And the rest of that is coming from looking at our devices. And that's a lot of screen time. That's a lot of advertising time. Those are billions and billions of dollars of market cap that are swaying towards that part of the industry.
And you touched on something I wanted to talk about too, which is the impact of the rise of something like Netflix and the response from traditional Hollywood. What are you seeing in that area? I mean, are you seeing a retreat? Are you seeing any kind of clever moves forward? What's going on in your world?
So there's a lot is the short answer. We don't even really know what the big Apple play is going to be. So table that. We have other tech companies that are spending $1 billion on a series, right, for the rights and for creating the series. These are just silly video game numbers. So I'm in the position where I can kind of be in the beehive of activity and be the transactor amongst all of these different parties. So as technology continues to iterate, it makes my job, it's sort of like the king is dead, long live the king. So I'll serve the next king, whoever that is, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think the obvious response is Disney, right? Iger's a genius, and he's incredibly strategic. And by getting the Fox deal done, they obviously take the majority control in Hulu. They have their own platform now. They obviously very recently stripped their content out of Netflix. So now they have the technology, they have the most valuable library in the world, and they can grow that platform. And I think it was announced publicly that Hulu is going to launch to all 120 countries that Netflix has in 2018. So we know that traditional Hollywood, Disney probably leading the way the best, is figuring out how to keep up. But I think you're right. It's like, I think it was Ted Sarandos who says, we don't count Jeff Bezos out on anything, ever. Yeah. The guy is a maverick. He will figure this out. I think Amazon is an interesting Rubik's Cube in terms of what they want, what they're trying to figure out they want. But I love the internal memo that Jeff Bezos sent when Netflix was sort of killing it last year. And he just said, stop everything and find me the new Game of Thrones. Figure it out.
And they did.
And they do. So in terms of even casting, or let's talk about the impact of technology on modern stardom. What are you seeing there? Because, I mean, people, we're still sort of at this festival where we seem to be looking for a very old-fashioned, very 20th century version of something that really doesn't seem possible to create anymore. What are we seeing in terms of how people are manifesting 21st century stardom?
So as technology creates, as we take in this technology in different ways, and you spend a lot of attention in different ways, that brings value to a different package as you're putting something together in different ways. So, but it's very interesting because it's not as simple as, well, instead of having to get a movie star to cast my action movie around, I can go get a YouTube star and conversion doesn't happen in terms of how we would hope it would, of ticket sales and everything like that. However, as price points do come down for production at least, if not delivery, I am finding value in alternative ways. It does make a difference if I can say, I have a music star who's going to be my third lead, who has these insane numbers and who can actually drive traffic to that very same device that somebody's using to then watch whatever that content is on their subscription video on demand, right? That's an actual value add that's now a thing, that's now enabled because of technology living on top of technology, a star that was born in that realm, and then we kind of wrap this traditional thing of, oh, and we have this movie star and this movie star, and so now I have my package that I can go and sell.
No, it's a fascinating time, and I think that, I look at, I was presented with a Chinese actress recently, and the first thing they said to me was like, she's got 3.5 million followers, she does this, these brands love her, and all this was something that never would have been mentioned 5 years ago. So it's an amazing step forward in a strange way. But
relevance is different now.
Yes,
yeah.
very, 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 very different. And also I think that it's turned actors and actors' worlds into something much more traditionally business-like. It's very interesting to see that people are coming at this from a place that never would have in the past. Let's talk about how things like VR and AR or AI are impacting distribution. Are you guys seeing any effects there?
So, I going back to my undergraduate studies, I've always been kind of a tech geek in terms of virtual reality.
Right.
Going back to one of my favorite movies growing up that I had no business watching was Lawnmower Man in the theaters. I think I was like 8. VR has always been the technology of the future, and right now it sort of always will be the technology in the future. So whenever that time comes, I think we'll be ready for it. But I actually think that Hollywood spends a lot of time, this is something I'm actually very passionate about in my own practice. Hollywood spends a lot of time on the content side. Hollywood's very, very good at content and marketing. I think virtual reality and AR and kind of everything that we talk about in Hollywood with those things is actually more of an infrastructure problem first. If everybody in the United States, at least, had a fiber optic connection, okay, now we can talk about getting all of that, all those terabytes of data into homes so that now we can watch whatever it is with your Oculus set, right? But after the infrastructure problem with the wires and pipes coming into those homes, now we've got a hardware problem. Is everybody going to go buy a $1,000 headset? Maybe, but maybe we need to innovate there too. So there's opportunities and choke points along the way that way downstream, okay, now let's give people like, luminaries like James Cameron a new paintbrush to paint with and say, okay, what if Avatar was a 3D world, right, where we can go and be in the movie and experience the story in a different way, right? But all of those steps before that, that theater doesn't exist right now, right? So I think it's much more about, and as I work with tech companies and I help fund tech companies, and I advise tech companies, it's in this overlap to try to solve some of these problems that are a little bit upstream of the very unsexy, but very opportunistic, like getting the pipes and the wires into the homes, getting the hardware right, getting the platforms that all of those things are going to sit on so people can see whatever the content is, and now we can talk about the content.
Yeah, I think the infrastructure comment is dead right. Because we provide capital to all kinds of projects and media companies, we've been invited in to have conversations with, stealing your phrase, places we probably have no business being in. So, for instance, Sony had invited us in to have a discussion with their AR team and VR team about 18 months ago. And the stat that they gave us was crazy. It was there's only 1 million active headsets in the United States right now. And those active headsets are not even all transacting every week and purchasing content. They may just be watching free content or freemium content. So if your entire audience that right now is addressable is 1 million people, Hollywood's really great at making money, right? Or at least pretending to make money. Or someone at the studio level is making money. I don't know if the application for AR and VR is necessarily, like Gerren's getting at, today for entertainment. But I would definitely say, I mean, all of us watch, the Facebook F8 conference, whatever. The applications for VR and AR are incredible. It doesn't mean it's going to have to be all of us sitting at home watching I've heard people say when we worked on that Pulp Fiction project,
Right.
repurposing a Pulp Fiction scene so you could be in that dance sequence with Travolta or with Uma Thurman, whichever you prefer. And it was really cool.
Yeah.
And we had the rights to do this, and it seemed like a slam dunk. And for a while, we chatted with some really big AR and VR players, and then they just sort of realized, like, but who's going to pay for it? There's only
Right,
a million.
for who?
Yeah, for who? It's cool,
That's the thing.
but for who? So I think as a marketing concept, entertainment-wise, I know there's a lot of big brands that love the experiential aspect of it. But ultimately, Sony was bringing us in to ask if we wanted to share the risk of financing something that ultimately they should take the entire piece down. They own the hardware. They own PlayStation, which is the store through which all of these headsets can purchase content. And they're a multinational conglomerate,
Right.
but yet they want to ask a company in Hollywood to co-finance it with
Well,
them.
you know.
To me, it's incredibly telling about their own optimism or expectations for what the actual economics look like.
And Rebecca, I wanted to go back a little bit. So, do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I was going to say with the VR especially, and it's here, and this is going to continue to grow. But just shooting at 360 degrees is really difficult to do and incredibly costly. You know, a 360 degree set, it's going to be expensive. So before you've even started, it's the budgets once again, and it's a clunky workflow.
I was going to ask you another question, which is about the creative content that you're seeing. Now that there's so many things that are possible for people, what have you seen the shift in the way things are shot and executed and delivered, not just on a technical level, but truly from an artistic point of view?
It's very hard because there's a school of thought. There's traditional filmmakers, young people who want to be a traditional filmmaker, and they have a romantic notion that they want to start shooting again on film. But once again, you've got to drive that into the new arena and get the best out of the back end. I don't think there has been a massive change. They want to make that content and get it, to get it out there. But I do think that it's become, with the VR especially, I would hate to think it won't go the same way as 3D, which sort of comes every few years. This is really, really going to be, it's not going to be the dead dog. But I often wonder if it's part of the problem is do you want to sit for 2 hours with a headset on? You need to find this way of making it more comfortable for the end user.
Let's take a little leap here. Let's talk about cryptocurrency, because that is technology on a certain level, and it's a new currency, and it's also being, in strange ways, embraced by the business. What are you seeing in those steps?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are, like anything, there were early adopters before the crazy boom of it last November, December, that I thought were really cool and innovative. Gerren knows how much I love the company XYZ. Awesome company in the US. They're super innovative guys, and they're doing really cool things. And when Nick and Aram had told me they were going to do an ICO for a slate of movies, I hadn't heard that yet. I think I've heard that 15 times in the last 4 days. But last October, I hadn't heard anybody doing that. So they issued an ICO for a specific token for a slate of 3 movies, and it was successful. They're in production on those movies. That's cool. Do I think that is sustainable? I don't know. I mean, there's obviously a lot of noise around the volatility of the currency. I will say, as someone that holds Ethereum, Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ripple, Bitcash, I'm sold. I love it. I think it's cool. I think it's an alternative asset class, and sit on it and see what happens. And I think a lot of smart money is chasing it, and a lot of smart people are. Goldman Sachs doesn't open up a trading desk to trade Bitcoin if it's fake.
Right.
Period. The Winklevis don't plug in $3 billion of fiat currencies if it's fake. Are there applications of it that are being taken and applied illegally? Definitely. Do I think there's a noise here of companies that are sort of crypto infused that are going to fizzle out? Definitely. I mean, it's like the Uber effect. 5 years ago, everyone had an Uber this business. Those all went away. The real businesses stayed. I think crypto is here to stay, and certainly blockchain as a technology is here to stay. It's incredibly efficient. The decentralization of currency, we all know it's going to be regulated. The government's figuring it out. think there was an article in The Economist that says it generally takes governments 8 years after something truly technologically revolutionary for a government to catch up and properly regulate it. So we're in like year 3. Government's figuring out what to do. We're already seeing certain governments not allow it. But in terms of its application to the film business, we've seen everything from people saying, we've got a gap shortfall in our budget. Can Bondit advance us the money against my Bitcoin wallet? Because I've got the currency in Bit.
Wow.
I just
What do
don't
you
want
say
to. I just don't. We didn't do it. I loved it. I was interested in it. Can you advance against Bitcoin? And then I've seen things as recently as this week of someone saying, a big sales company here, and the founder of the company saying, can we repay you in Ethereum? And I said, what? And he said, well, one of our buyers wants to pay us in Ethereum.
Wow.
So we'll have a discussion.
Like a lot of other things, the unsexiest part of cryptocurrencies, the actual underlying infrastructure and code that sits upon, I think is actually the most interesting part of this all. And very smart people are trying to figure out how to create direct-to-consumer distribution platforms based around the architecture that all of these cryptocurrencies sit on. And I think that utilizing smart contracts, maybe even potentially sussing out piracy in certain applications, those are very exciting prospects for Hollywood. But I'm also rolling the dice in some deals. I mean, a year ago, a theoretical ICO is this year's trend, and next year, we'll see what happens with it. But we'll both be there.
I love it. So I think it's time to open up the room to questions if anybody has any. Or any comments. Well, we can carry on. There's always more to talk about, but I thought I'd give you guys a chance. Come on, darn it. So I think, we've got a few more minutes left. I want to ask you both, or all three of you, what your thoughts are in terms of the future. I mean, we talk about, for example, the fact that most content right now is being delivered through phones. We look at something like we're 3 years away from the entire African continent from being completely connected. What do you think that's going to do to content for that region? And how is that going to change content production on the global level?
That's a great question, because what we often skip over, I think, in the shiny offices of Hollywood, is how when we talk about content and democratization, this and that, there are economies and billions of people who are being brought into a modern age, and for us, that means we have more customers. Right? We have more people who want to watch that content. It's been a dream of mine since I started in Hollywood. I want to have something to do with the first international runaway blockbuster hit that has nothing to do with theaters or TV screens. I don't know what that looks like.
I think we're close, though.
But I think that time is coming, yeah. And I think that when people are solving the infrastructure problem, which is what's happening in Africa, and when, for example, on the in at least some of the most populated countries in Africa, when you have banking infrastructure leading the way with mobile payments and stuff like that, now you have consumer expectations that this is a thing that I use for everything in my life. And what about watching this award show, right? We're doing, and I mean, time will tell if it's a good deal or not, but we're doing something with a very well-known award show on the continent of Africa with the largest mobile player, because they're ready, and they're saying, we need hundreds of hours of content, guys. Let's do something here.
That's going to be incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I think going even broader than just Africa, Netflix has 120 million users, but there are 3 billion people that pay for some form of broadband or cable subscription globally. So if you think about Netflix's addressable market and how it's going to change over the next however many years it takes, they haven't even scratched the surface.
Right.
It's like we're talking a percentile of people that pay for cable, so why don't they just pay for Netflix? And that's the belief of Netflix, is we will find anchor content for these regions that subscriber bases haven't grown aggressively yet. For the first quarter, Q1 of 2018, half of Netflix's subscribers were non-English first-speaking languages.
Right.
That's crazy. So they feel like North America is saturated. They need content for these emerging regions, or regions that parts of Europe may take longer to adapt to the technology. But I think Netflix is incredible. But I also think places like Amazon, Google, Apple, they find ways to catch up because they have the scale. You continue going back to the infrastructure comment. What better infrastructure is there than a company like Amazon that touches 1 billion customers a day? Right. Their addressable market is huge, and I think Netflix is leading the way in terms of the land grab of content and finding ways to get it in front of emerging audiences. But I don't think it's even touched what it can be. Mm-hmm.
I think that what I like about the advance of technology is we're finally the global audience is going to be able to see the content as the filmmaker intended, because that's taken 100 years. People have seen movies completely scratched in some backwater somewhere. Now they can actually view it as it was created, and I think that's brilliant.
I think it's interesting, too, because you also mentioned piracy a little earlier, which is an old Hollywood model issue, and it's still an issue. Mm-hmm. But Netflix skips right over that as well. And the price point is such that people who deal in pirated material usually can't afford to go to a theater and take 3 kids or pay for a babysitter and parking, popcorn, blah, blah, blah. But at home with Netflix or on the phone with Netflix, you've got everything you want right there, and it's nothing. Mm-hmm. $9 for a month of entertainment. So it eliminates an entire issue. Mm-hmm. I think that, I've seen, for example, this marvelous, we're going to television now, but a marvelous series that BBC is doing called Black Earth Rising, and it's an international thriller, very authentically international, but it winds up taking place on 3 different continents, and it works so well. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see these kinds of projects happening. More and more.
New customers.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess if there's no questions, I would say Movie Pass. I know you and I had a quick conversation on it. Mm-hmm. I had a couple conversations with some friends from Europe who say Movie Pass isn't necessarily there yet, but there are similar companies doing similar things. It's cool innovation. I think we all in this room agree, as much as technology is changing the business, it needs more of it. It needs more innovation. It needs more young people pushing the ways these things are done. We all love coming here and looking at these huge yachts and walking through the marché, but it's old school. It doesn't really make that much sense in today's world. Movie Pass is cool. Curious on thoughts on that.
I love the model. I have a Movie Pass in my pocket right now. Without getting into, I love the idea of what it is and how it is activating people who are coming out in droves to come be customers and see our content. Without getting into whether it's going to work or not, I think that there's a lot to be said for moving the ball forward. And I think that subscription-based content models are here to stay. And to the extent that we can reach back to more traditional technologies, like going to a theater, and activate that traditional side, as well as reach forward and say, well, not only this content, but your subscription gets you this, right? Which I'm hoping, and I think that's kind of where this is all going. That's exciting for all of us, because at the end of the day, whether you're a tiny art house filmmaker or whether you're Michael Bay, you want as many eyeballs to watch your content as possible. You make filmed content, which doesn't use film anymore. You make filmed content for people to watch it. Yes. And so when some kind of new scary technology comes that's going to wipe out some existing players, but opens it up to even more fans, that's ultimately a good thing, and we need to shift around that.
It's interesting, too, when we talk about that impact. I mean, I love the fact that these algorithms are also breaking down a lot of long-held prejudices that were very entrenched in this old-school business. It's making audience segments clearly show their value, and so we're seeing, the breakdown of racial issues, gender issues, and ethnic or cultural issues, and I think that's another brilliant aspect of technology. That it's just the numbers are just showing that this is got to go. Yeah. And I think that's going to be really a solution. I mean, we can protest all we want, but at the end of the day, we know that almost cultures are driven by business.
Yeah. I agree with that, and I'm the product of 2 crazy civil rights activists of the '60s and '70s, and in a way, I look at what I do as using the almighty dollar to move that conversation forward. And yes, as we get better and better means of understanding what people want and who the people are who we're going to give it to, and we realize that it's a melting pot, kind of no matter where you live and what language you speak, being able to do those, for me, being able to do those kinds of content transactions is a really important thing.
Any final thoughts, guys?
I've always thought you should never underestimate the impact of the viewing public. And we do have this global audience who are just there to consume as much product as possible. And we shouldn't be making films just for these for Cannes or just for the studios. It's for everyone. And I think it's really exciting that we are finally able to tap into this.
Yeah.
Oh, we have a question. Stand up and shout. You're amongst friends.
The Uber of sales agents was the question.
Yeah.
I love it. But as we've been dancing around, the piece of our business, at every point where there's an exchange, a transaction, a middleman, that slows down the process. That slows down innovation. That slows down the innovation of technology and also the innovation of how we get, I have this idea for something, to I'm watching something. And all of the steps in between, to the extent that there's going to continue to be a lot of consolidation around the companies in our business who are enabling those transactions as continents shrink down to icebergs in a lot of these ways. And I think there's a lot of smart money trying to figure out those kinds of platforms of let's cut out this middleman. Well, what if we cut out this middleman? Well, how do we control for quality? Well, then we have to put this middleman back in, but we can move this middleman in. So I think that those are all worthwhile endeavors.
The analogy that has sort of best described it in discussions I've had, I don't know if folks are familiar with what Zillow is or Trulia for real estate. So those are two mobile-based and web-based platforms that have really revolutionized the way real estate is sold. However, you sort of think about film very similar to real estate, which it's a personal transaction, it's a relationship-based transaction. A lot of these buyers and sellers have known each other for 20, 30, 40 years. And so what Trulia did ultimately is allow the process to change as a consumer. So let's say if you're a sales company selling to a buyer, the buyer may find a piece of content on a platform, but they still want to sit down, just like you want to go view the house that you found on Trulia and deal with the real estate agent to actually transact. To me, that is probably the future. It's some level of consolidation, actual use of technology. I had a conversation with a huge sales company in the Marché yesterday who said, it's been a really, really great market. We're not doing any sales. And I said, what? And they said, well, everyone's coming in, watching the content, we're having a coffee, we're having a discussion, they're saying that they're interested and they're going to go home and have a discussion. It's like, well, you could effectively do that online. You don't have to come to the south of France to have a cup of coffee and watch a trailer. You can do it at home.
It's so much nicer in the Carlton when that happens.
But I think the point is that human element of it, I don't know how it could go away. And as someone who loves technology and let's really advance things as fast as you can, just like real estate was shaken up by Trulia and Zillow, companies like Rights Trade, Digital Cloud Film Network, these platforms that exist to try and systematically change that. I think it's interesting, but I think it's for off-market viewing sessions, while the market is meant to sort of put a face to who's behind the other side of the transaction. Hollywood has largely always been, international sales has truly always been about that. So I don't know how it could completely go away, but are there too many sales companies? Yes. Period.
Yeah. That's a mic dropping statement. You have a question?
Yeah, it's just one monopoly being overthrown by another, right? The 6-member studio system being overthrown by, ultimately, what do they call it, FANG, right?
Mm-hmm.
Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, the FANG companies, and they control. And the scary stat last year was, talk about monopolization. For every $1 retail dollar spent in North America last year, 27 cents of it was Amazon, one company. So to think that they can't use technology to do that in media, I don't know. I mean, there's going to be 5,000 feature films made this year. Not very many of them are going to be Netflix or Amazon originals. People are still going to independently make content. Films are still, like the Florida Project, for instance, that filmmaker is going to want freedom to work with a really cool company. You sort of nicely tabled the Apple discussion. Mm-hmm. Apple has made offers to buy the coolest, most modernly focused distribution companies in the world, and those companies have said no because they want to remain autonomous, to be cutting edge. And you think about these companies that sort of play by the old rules, they don't necessarily need to sell. There's more money in the market. It's not just those companies, but it's definitely shaking things up when you reference the Scorsese comment. Paramount and Open Road, who were sort of bidding on that deal, they couldn't come close to the offer that ultimately Netflix came in with. And talk about a mic drop. Netflix comes in and sometimes just bids up $10, $20 million just to make a statement. And so I think, I don't think it's going to encroach on driving everyone else out of business. But if the rest of what the tentacles of the FANG companies touch is any indication, they have very deep pockets. They're incredibly strategic, and they can also buy instead of build. And so when Apple goes out and makes offers to the companies that we all in this room aspire to do business with, that shows that they have big-time ambitions, and they will probably, at some point, Apple is just getting started, and Amazon's still figuring it out. So there's a long way to go, but it's a huge market, huge.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the market will kind of dictate on its own what's going to work, and there's a few things that'll remain kind of as they are. Access to the pieces that you need to put together that content, meaning actors, directors, writers. That will continue to be important as we interact with all of these new players, or if they're old players. We know that the content distribution business begins with, well, what's going to be in the content? And as long as that remains true, it's not, we're not going to wake up tomorrow and every single company will be gone and it'll be replaced by new companies.
We have time for one last question, Alexa.
The number I've seen, the number I've seen is they're spending $8 billion.
Yep.
5 of it is on original content. 3 of it is on acquisitions. That's just this year's number. But that spans across TV, anthology, film, series, etc. I think what's really crazy is the $3 billion so the $5 billion they're spending on originals. We all watch original content at Netflix. It's impressive content. The $3 billion they're spending on acquisitions is such an interesting strategy, and you see it more than I do, but it's a buyer's market for them. Filmmakers want their content on Netflix, and Netflix knows that if a movie performs decently at a festival, they'll compete for it with dollars to buy it. But if it doesn't have a big breakout, those filmmakers still want to go to Netflix, and they'll take often maybe even a lower dollar amount from Netflix because it goes so wide. And we've seen $3 million, $4 million, $5 million, $6 million, $7 million movies sell to Netflix for $500,000 for global rights, because Netflix can say, we'll wait, movie doesn't break out, and then we own it. So I think the $3 billion they spend on acquisitions stretches further in terms of the number of pieces of product they get.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And they're being so aggressive, so aggressive.
And another comment on that is that when they do acquire from a third party, the first thing they like to do is put the front card saying a Netflix original, even though it's not. Well, some filmmakers say no, but very often they don't.
Well, you know, we're gonna. Unless you have a final comment.
No, final comment.
We could go on, but we are out of time. I thank you all very much, and thank my wonderful panelists for all their
Thank you.
insights.
Thank you, Steve.
And thank you.